Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like to welcome everyone to our first podcast with Brother Danny and Brother Ihab. And one of the things that is very important for us as Muslims to understand is to understand the condition of the Ummah in order to make a real change or bring about revival. And one of the things we wanted to touch upon is, the current relevant situations that is affecting the Ummah. And one of the goals, inshallah, is that we're able to discuss some issues that are relevant to our time. And I think for today's topic, our first topic is the U.S. trying to contain Israel, or is it doing the opposite, where it's allowing it to do whatever it wants to do in the Middle East, in that region? So with that, we have our brother Ihab, who's going to elaborate upon this, and also brother Danny, who's going to help us understand the situation there. So brother Ihab, you want to elaborate on this question?
Well, let me interject just 1 second.
Go ahead.
I just want to add one thing to what you said. Assalamu alaikum. For those who are going to watch this, I've known these two brothers for years. They're both brilliant men. And I mention this only because I'm not brilliant. And that's why they insisted I be on this podcast, because they needed, sometimes when I hear these brilliant gentlemen talk, they talk over my head. So I'm the voice of the common man. I'm trying to take what their content and trying to understand it. Because if I can understand it, that means most likely my neighbor will understand it. And that's how we're going to decimate and intellectualize ourselves. So my role is kind of semi-monitored, what did you say? And let's dumb it down a little bit, if that makes sense. Also, I just want to add, before we even get into the topic, I think a prevalent question, especially since this is the first one, would be to ask you, Ihab, as well as Hassan, or myself, why do Muslims, well, no matter where you live today, why do we need to even understand the world through a political lens? Why do we understand the news? Because we live in a culture where most people today, unfortunately, are getting their blurb from Facebook or God knows where, and they just read the headline. I myself am a victim of this sometimes when I have a busy life, and I don't go deeper than that. And some people I know, because I have my day job, I have a martial arts academy my night job, where I speak to many, many, many Muslim men. We're talking dozens and dozens and dozens throughout the day, maybe more so than both you gentlemen. So, and I talk to them and I ask them, and most of them are the same type. They just read the headline, if even that. So this to me is a more important question. Let's answer that real quick and then get into the topic, if that makes sense. Do you agree or disagree?
Okay, let's speak to that.
Okay.
So Islam is a political ideology. It is not a religion. It describes a certain way of life and it wants to establish it. And it wants to establish it in a way that structures the public sphere, meaning the political. So if you are a Muslim, you need to look to the world from a political point of view, meaning what is going on in the public sphere and how should it be shaped in a way that pleases Allah. To start with, you need to understand what is the current setup. If you're going to deal with it, you need to understand it. In this particular podcast, I'm not interested in the whole process of political analysis. I'm just interested in one single part of it, the context. So when you try to analyze any event, you have to first contextualize it, meaning put it within its relevant relationships to the status quo. Then, based on this understanding, you start to predict what is going to happen in the near future and possibly how it's going to impact the world and events over the long term. But before you start talking about what is going to happen today or what's going to happen in a year or 10 years, you first need to contextualize. Long time ago, Taqiyuddin pointed out that the most dangerous mistake you can ever make in a political analysis is to put it in the wrong context. So,
can you give an example of putting something in the wrong context?
How about the Iraq War? There was a moment in time where everyone in my circles thought
that's a good example.
Happen, and then why ended up happening?
Yes, so that's a good example. For example, the Iran-Iraq War. So a lot of people thought of this as Saddam is the champion of the Arabs and he's protecting them from the Persians. Others thought of this as the Islamic Revolution coming to conquer the the nationalist secular Arab world. And both of them failed to put it in the context of the fact that we live in a colonial order.
Yes.
And that Iraq is part of that colonial order. and that Iran is a new entrant into the order that is trying to find a place for itself within that international colonial order. And without putting it in this context, they were just, swimming in details without understanding how they relate to the big picture, and coming up with all kinds of weird conclusions like Saddam is a great man, Khomeini is a great man, the Ummah is going to succeed because Saddam is going to protect the Arabs, and the Arabs are the heart of Islam. The Ummah is going to succeed because Khomeini is going to get rid of the Ba'athist secular Islam hating party. And in the end, the Ummah got screwed up because the US used both to establish colonial control over Iraq and the Gulf. So you need to put things in context. The context might be, the event might be a small detail and its context is limited. It might be a large important event as its context is much larger than that. And the question is, the meaning of context is, so why is that happening now? What are the driving forces? How are the different important actors relating to it? How do they perceive it? That doesn't mean we understand where it's going to lead, but it's the starting point. So I just want to, in this podcast, I just want to concentrate on this, meaning I would not want to progress into predicting what the future is going to hold.
So that being said, you see for almost a year now what's happening in Palestine and the whole situation. So can you put into context, because a lot of us, sometimes we get emotional. A lot of times we get, we start to make predictions. We get caught up in the hype of the media. We want to feel good about something. We want anything just to grab to.
Or we want to feel bad and maintain feeling bad.
Or even that.
All of that exists as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
It could never be good because nothing good could ever happen.
Yes, I agree. So that being said, there's an overlying a perception that Israel can do whatever they want. In fact, they actually control what U.S. does through AIPAC and other institutes. So what is your thought on this?
Okay, fine. So there are two ways or many ways actually, of thinking about how the relationship between the U.S. and Israel. There is the view of the Arab media, which has been absorbed by a lot of Muslims. This view was propagated by the Arab governments that the U.S. is a well-meaning old guy that is being misled by the bad, nefarious Zionists, and we're going to go and explain things to him. And the good master is going to be beneficent on us and going to take care of us. That works well for the narrative of the client regimes in the Arab world. That's before they turned Zionist, fully Zionist. So this was a narrative throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, and all the way until the Arab Spring. Beyond that, the narrative changes because now you have openly Zionist regimes who have a different way of approaching it. Previously, those people were justifying their client status with the U.S. that we are trying to plead with the master, the colonial master, so it would take pity on us and stop listening to the bad advice of the bad Zionists. That view, I think, doesn't even merit response because it's obviously self-serving from client regimes. The business of, the Zionists control the U.S. Well, if you look carefully, and especially for those who are speaking English and can access Western media, even when Trump goes to talk to the Zionist lobby, he's poking fun at them. Yeah, you guys come and ask me for stuff and give you even more than what you want. Come give me what I want. And your state actually is nothing. It can disappear in 2 years.
So then the question is, what does the U.S. want?
Do you think this guy's afraid of them?
Yeah. So what do you think?
He's trying to get their money. He's trying to fool them like everybody else.
Yeah. It's a role. They're both playing a role.
Yeah. So what do you think?
Trump keep telling them, if I don't win, it will disappear in 2 years. Is that somebody who is trying to carry favor with them? This is, about a street hustler trying to steal your money.
Let me refine what you said. In other words, he knows that the word need maybe is not the right word, but something.
I need your money.
I need your money. Okay, fine. You said it. I need your money. And you guys need me.
And I'll tell you whatever you want now to give me my money, and then I'll do whatever I want.
And the Israeli lobby knows that. They know that they're all there for the same role. You want my money. So
Yeah.
I'll give you my money, just like a business deal, as long as I get X and Y. It
Yeah.
sounds to me like any corporate lobbyist.
Yeah, but actually, the largest lobby in the US is not ABAC; it's the insurance lobby. If you look at the money and the numbers, the insurance lobby is the largest lobby. It has always been the largest lobby. That's why they can never have public health care, because the insurance lobby wouldn't have it. But the issue is those who are saying that have a reductionist point of view that is propagated by Arab media and those who have been sickened by its persistent lies and fictions. What I want to address is a less popular view that holds that actually the US is irritated at Israel and it's not able to control it explicitly because it's not fashionable to come out and say, well, Israel is wayward, it's harming US interests, so you have to put a stop to them. So instead, it has to skim and plan to get Israel to commit mistakes and in the process hurt itself. And I think that view is completely mistaken. It loses the context.
So what do you think? So what do you think the U.S. is trying to do then? Is it this allowing them to do whatever they want,
But
or is it serving a cause, or what is it?
I'd like first to expound on this view.
Please.
So in this world view,
Okay.
there is a distinction between U.S. interests and Israeli interests, and that's reasonable because the U.S. is a state that has its own interests. It's actually the empire, and it enforces the Western colonial order all over the world.
Correct.
In the global order, Israel is a smaller Western power, so it's part of the Western alliance. It has to stay within the norms. It thinks that it's smart and can violate the norms and stay here and there to serve its interests. So there is definitely not a complete alignment in interests. However, the context is, in the end, Israel, unlike, for example, England or France or Italy, is a colonial project. The existence of Israel itself is a colonial project. So the existence and continued existence and security and long-term stability of Israel is a vital national interest of the US. So unlike, for example, Greece, Greece, since the First World War, the existence of Greece is not in debate. There was a point in time in the 19th century when it was. But right now, it's not in debate. So the existence of Israel, of Greece, for example, is not a matter of national interest to the colonial order, the US. But the existence of Israel as a forward base for colonialism is a national interest of the colonial empire, the US. Biden has been saying that repeatedly. Others have said it before him. And people need to listen to what's being said. Typically, people think that, well, politicians, when they speak, are always lying. Not true. It depends. When the politician speaks especially in a democratic system, he is trying to lay grounds to justify a policy, to create acceptance of that policy.
Yes.
These grounds might be truthful and correct and may not. But to claim that they are not truthful and correct, then you need to find evidence to this. To assume that because he's a politician, he is always lying, it's really foolish. That essentially destroys all mental processes. To assume that something is a lie, you need evidence that it's a lie. Now, some people in particular are well known unable to say the truth, like Trump or Saddam. But these are exceptions. Typically, politicians in the end need to operate within the real world, so they need to speak to their constituencies, so even dictators. So they need to make some sense. They need to create some story. So when Biden keeps saying that Israel is a national interest of the US because we need this base, he was saying that as a senator, he's saying that as a president. When others say exactly the same thing, they mean it. Israel is a national interest of the US. Now, it is also true that the US
Let me just clarify. When you say quote unquote base, we're not just talking about an area where I can put my troops. It's much bigger than that. It's an area. In other words, Israel is a tool.
No. I mean it in the very traditional sense of, well, the US has a small base in the desert between Jordan, Iraq, and Syria.
Okay.
Yeah. It's essentially a couple of towers. Tomorrow, some sandstorm happens and it's not inhabitable anymore.
Okay.
Or by mistake, like the mistake in the Iraqi drone, a couple of them hit the base and it's not inhabitable anymore. It disappears. The US has bases in its colony in Iraq. That could tomorrow change. It is possible that this colonial order in Iraq may collapse. On the other hand, the colony of Israel can never disappear. I'm talking about colony in the traditional sense, in the traditional old 19th century sense.
Okay.
They say that. So why do you, when they say it's a base, it's our aircraft carrier.
So you mentioned here the U.S. interests. What do you see as the Israeli interests on the other hand?
Israel has its own interests. Well, it's highway robbers who are stealing on the land and resources on mass level.
Yeah.
They're all scared of the population around them, and they think that the only way they can have their theft and enjoy it is that everybody else around them has to kowtow to them. So they are always on an aggressive posture. That doesn't necessarily suit the U.S. The U.S. has a lot of other interests in addition to Israel. And it doesn't appreciate, for example, when Israel decides that it wants to eject the inhabitants of Gaza and into Sinai. Their agent in Egypt, Sisi, spent 5 to 7 years killing everything in sight in Sinai just to stabilize his control over it. He doesn't need 2 million. He did that against 250,000 population of Sinai. You want to increase it by 10 times? They don't need this grief. And if they allow them to do this today in Gaza, tomorrow they do it in the West Bank, because the West Bank is even more valuable to them. Gaza is just desert. They left it willingly, but the West Bank is not desert. It's quite desirable to them. It's strategically desirable to them because Israel is really, really, really a very small, tiny thing. And if you stand at the most western point in West Bank, you see the sea across what is called Israel. So strategically, they want this more. And if they would let them to eject the population of, or quote unquote, transfer the population of Gaza today, tomorrow they will transfer the population of West Bank. And that would collapse Jordan, because Jordan is not a big state. And the Jordanian government has always been playing the game of creating nationalist friction between the tribal population of east of the river versus the agrarian population of west of the river. So right now, that brings down the government. And Jordan is the base of the U.S. colony in Iraq and the U.S. military operations in Syria. That disturbs the U.S. order. Although the U.S. is the existence and safe existence and continued existence of Israel is a national interest of the colonial U.S. empire, that doesn't mean that their interests are going to align always. That is not in debate. This point is not in debate. The problem is when you proceed from this correct point to go and say, well, and because of this, the U.S. has to skim and plan so that it would contain Israel through its own aggression, meaning it would let Israel go too far so it would fall in its own trap. That is really a very bad misread of the contextual relationships between the U.S. and Israel and between the U.S. and Israel in the world.
But usually in the past, and when you look at Gaza, they'll go on for a month or two, maximum 2.5, 3 months. Nothing like this, where it's almost been a year and there's no end in sight. And they're even expanding their attacks. So do you think the U.S. is trying to contain Israel in this context, or they're allowing them to do whatever they want?
So the containment argument goes like this. The containment argument goes like Israel is actually hurting itself because it is aggravating the whole world against it and showing that it's a danger to the world. The argument goes like this. And the U.S. sees that and allows it to happen because it wants to put the U.S. in Israel in a weak position so that it can contain it. This argument is very problematic on 2 levels. First, the U.S. is not that weak. And while it pretends it's weak and cannot stop Israel, this is not because it cannot stop it. It's because what Israel is doing is acceptable to the U.S.
Yes.
Either acceptable because it actually achieves goals or because it doesn't cause harm that is irreparable to the U.S. So they don't think it's worth stopping or containing. This idea that the Biden administration is too weak and afraid of Israel is incorrect, because Biden has shown before that when he decides that something is worth doing, worth spending the political capital, he will do it. He did that in Afghanistan, and he paid political capital for this. Trump wanted to withdraw from Afghanistan throughout his 4 years, and he wouldn't do it because he was not willing to spend the political capital. So Biden has shown that he can do that. Now he may calculate that it's not a good time now. Yeah, possible. But particularly for Biden, this argument is not strong. And he is not anyway going for elections. But the more reasonable argument is, well, he doesn't see this as something that is worth spending political capital. It's a capitalist argument. So you want to achieve a good. If the price you want to pay for it is more than the good, it's not worth it. Putting a stop to what Israel is doing is something that the U.S. could do. It has a lot of tools to do it. Israel is completely dependent on the U.S. It has a lot of tools to do it. It chooses not to do it because what Israel is doing comes in 2 types. Some of it actually is to U.S. advantage. It achieves U.S. goals. Some of it are not to U.S. advantage, but is not very harmful. It's not worth spending the political capital. So it's a rational political calculation.
So what are these goals you say that U.S. is achieving, and if allowing the world to be angry and everyone be upset?
So
for other countries,
this business that the U.S. sees that Israel is undermining itself by aggravating the whole world against it is not correct. The point itself is not correct. The U.S. doesn't see that. There is currently an imperial hubris that controls the U.S. political class. So they think, for example, that they can stay safe from the international backlash against Israel by saying, well, we're actually trying to achieve peace, and we are calling for peace in Gaza, and we're calling for peace in Lebanon. And see, Biden today issued a statement, we want to bring peace to the people of Israel and the people around him. And we are offering a peace deal in Gaza, and we are working on a peace deal in Lebanon. He thinks that this kind of thing gives him deniability and protects him from the backlash. So if he thinks that about himself, he thinks that about Israel as well.
I agree.
I think that is a very bad calculation, but they have it. So to begin with, so this argument that the US is trying to contain Israel contextually is wrong on both levels. First, the US administration is capable of spending political capital with the size that it wants to spend it. It can spend political capital, and it's in a position to force Israel, but it chooses not. Look, for example, today, in Biden's statement, Biden essentially congratulated Israel for killing Nasrallah. Could have as easily said, well, you brought the capital of Lebanon on the heads of its residents. This is not acceptable. This is a violation of the international order. You can't do that. He could have as well said that.
But what makes, again...
He chose not only to say that essentially that justice has been done, that Israel is free to go after anybody in the Arab world, but not Iran.
So that being said, so why is this time different?
Come again.
Why they're giving Israel more flexibility to do what they want in the Muslim world for this amount of time? Usually,
you mean in this incident or since the beginning in Gaza?
Since the beginning of Gaza,
Israel sustained an existential threat on October 7th. It was exposed to be a very weak state that a non-state actor can almost bring down. It's unnatural for any state to be put in a place where it can actually come down as a state through the action of a non-state actor. This is Rwanda, not a Western power. That is not acceptable to the Western colonial order, not just the US. If you listen carefully on October 7 and October 8 to all Western statements about the events of October 7, the word that you will read in all statements is shock. It is not acceptable for colonial subjects to raise their hand on the colonizers. It's not acceptable in the Western colonial empire for the lower races to bloody the master race. As a result, the colonized, not just Gaza, the world over, had to be taught a lesson. And they have been teaching them a lesson for a year now. I think the US has decided in May that lesson has been delivered, and that's enough. So that's why it has been saying, well, Israel tells us that it wants peace. And then Israel comes and says, no, we don't want peace. So Israel is very softly pressuring, the US is very softly pressuring Israel because it doesn't want to spend political capital on forcing it, because it doesn't think that the killing and destruction that Israel is doing is very important or detrimental to US influence and interests. So it's not worth spending political capital. The only problem with those who think that Israel controls the US or that the US has a long-term plan is that they cannot imagine that the colonial empire is this nasty and vicious and ugly. It is. Look the world as it is. Deal with it as it is.
Why can't they imagine that? Because are we short-sighted? We don't open a book and just read 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 100 years ago?
Because they can't think like a colonial capitalist.
Why? Because now we have stupid UN laws.
The US is not a regular capitalist. The US is a colonial capitalist. A colonial capitalist is a hyper-capitalist. The ugliest type of capitalist who does not only want to exploit those around him within his domain, he wants to find any human being anywhere that he can exploit and go and exploit them.
Yeah. So as an average Muslim, hearing all of this,
they see the grandfather Biden and they think, well, he can't be that horrible. Well, actually, he is nastier than Bibi Escobar.
No, I agree. But as an average Muslim, hearing all of this information, for some, this may be a shock. So how do you think the Muslim should, how should the Muslim think about this? How should we react to this? What are the steps forward for an average Muslim?
I'm not going to go there. To begin with, we said we want to be in context only. So let's keep the discussion in context.
Okay, let me keep it in context. So you're saying it's more important to maintain the colonial order, which I 100% agree with, even though the backlash is, okay, we're violating human rights and we're violating the ICC.
We don't recognize that this is damaging.
They don't recognize
that this in a material sense is damaging. The thinking is we are in control and we can always fool people by saying we have nothing to do with this. Actually, we want peace.
So are they trying to also achieve that they want nobody to ever think of resistance or to the colonial powers? Do you think
Not just resistance. Not just resistance. Actually, any colonial order has to create an internal process for the subjects to express themselves and to seek reprieve, and has to grant reprieve from time to time to maintain stability. You have to allow people to vent. However, there has to be laws for this. You can tweak the master race. You can plead with the master race. You can supplicate to the master race. You can even pinch the master race. But you can never raise your hand to slap the master race or bloody the master race. There are limits, and these limits have to be enforced clearly. But then you have to create vents to create stability in the system.
Okay, to put this into clear context, let's remove the last year. Give me another example where this has happened.
What has happened?
Where the master had to let the subjects know.
What the US did in 2001 in Afghanistan. 23 people, forget about it, a gang of hundreds of people committed a crime. Fine, that's a crime. That is not, let's change the international order. Let's return, what Bush Jr. did is he returned the world to the old colonial system of pre-World War I, pre-League of Nations. So this is old colonialism. You want something, go raid them. They created League of Nations because they decided this was too dangerous. Bush after 90 years returned the world to the same place. And we're seeing that today. This is continuation of the same logic. Even by his opposition, Democratic Party. Because the culture itself has its own logic. Okay. I think we should conclude here.
Okay.
Thank you for the analysis, and we'll stop here. Jazakumullah khair.